everyone. Welcome to an episode of If You Have to Pick Three, a podcast where Matt Gamba and I, Zach Shaw, have to pick their top three choices on any given topic. After we each share our nominations, we then have to come to an agreement on a final top three. Like I said, I'm Zach Shaw, and I'm here with Matt Gamba.
What's going on? Hey, Zach.
So, tell us a little bit about what we're debating today.
All right, so with the recent And Justice for All announcement, Metallica finally is giving everybody, I think the most controversial album, mixing-wise at least, a facelift. Can they put lipstick on a pig with that mix? But that's just my opinion. But they are going to remaster it and redo it, so that got us thinking, what other albums, so what three albums would we choose to have remastered if we could get the bands and the producers, throw them back in the studio and say, do your thing, make it work.
And I just want to stay for the record also. Initially, my first reaction was, oh, this is going to be so easy. And then it was, oh, this is going to be so tough, because there are actually so many great albums that were already remastered. And then when I finally came up with my top three, I was so excited. I'm like, oh, wow, I can't wait to share this. So I'm actually really excited to figure out what Matt said and what, obviously I'm right.
I'm actually, I don't know if you're right.
I'm definitely right, but yeah.
Well, I don't think there's really a right or a wrong in this one. I think it's just, what do you want to see remastered? Because in my opinion, I know that a lot of people are going to say, you're absolutely nuts for what you're picking, but I will back it up to the best of my ability, and we'll see where this goes.
See, I didn't even listen to you. I just kept thinking to myself, yeah, I'm right.
Well, you're like my wife too, so that doesn't matter.
Hey-o.
All right.
So, Matt, start us off. Name your top three.
All right, my top three. So, from 3 to 1, number 3, Black Label Society's, oh my God, I'm blanking on the Blessed Hell Ride. There we go. Wow. Number 3, I can't even get it out.
Yeah, you really want to hear that album remastered.
Oh, it's my favorite though. But yes, I really want to hear it remastered.
Hold on, tell me a little bit why though.
Okay.
Before we get into the other two.
Okay, so a little bit about this one. I loved 1919 Eternal. And listening to 1919 Eternal, it was crispy, it was punchy. It was everything that I think the Blessed Hell Ride wasn't. While the Blessed Hell Ride in terms of music and lyrics and what went into that album, it's my favorite. But 1919 Eternal just had the production value for me. And I really think that if you took that production and dumped it on the Blessed Hell Ride, you'd have an amazing album. I think just the production took a little bit away from me.
Fair enough.
All right. Number 2, Korn, Follow the Leader.
Interesting. All right. Defend yourself.
All right. Defend myself. All right. First and foremost, when I first got the album, way too many years ago at this point.
20 years.
Yeah, shut up. Way too many years ago at this point. But when I first picked the album up, I put it in, and I'm thinking to myself, why the hell is nothing coming out of this thing? And just sitting there mashing the next button, trying to figure out what's going on, only to find out that it starts 13 tracks deep. Okay. So, A, that's annoying. But once you get past that, all the music and everything on there, by today's standards of the way an album should sound and all of the technological advances ever since that album came out, early 2000s, late 90s mixes, when you listen to them in today's standards, it's like somebody put like a film of foam over the top of it and you're listening through the foam, at least to my ears. So it sounds to me like it has so much more potential. And I really think that album, being one of Korn's best, could easily make a great remaster.
All right, so what's your number 1 then?
And Justice for All.
But we're getting that.
I know. Okay, well, I kind of figured you'd say this.
We're getting that, though.
I know. But I also do have another number 1. Just in case I got that reaction from you.
I'm making you choose a different, because we're getting that one. It's too soon to tell if we need another one. Because I'll admit, if Ozzy has proven us on anything, we need more than one remaster.
Yes, but my number 1 is going to be Limp Bizkit's Significant Other.
So I want to remind everyone who's listening right now, I said I was right in the beginning of the episode. Remember that when you compare ours. But go, please.
Okay. So, once again, that late 90s, early 2000s production value has that layer of foam over it that makes it sound less than optimal. And if you go back and you think about the popularity that Limp Bizkit had on this album alone in the late 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, forget the fact that Fred Durst is a complete tool now. Everybody who lived through that era loved that album. I don't care who you are. Mm-hmm. You loved that album. Hands down. You have it. You still listen to break stuff when you have a bad day at work because your boss is an asshole. So on and so forth. You still like that album. It's your closet album. You have it buried back in the closet. You've got, that little vault that says do not open, and then you go secretly open it when nobody's around. You take it, you put it in your CD player, and you still jump around to Nookie, and you still headbang to break stuff. But I just think that when you take that album and you really give it a chance, it's one of the best of that era. It really is, no matter what you say. It really is one of the best, and I think that if Limp Bizkit was really serious about trying to make a comeback, forget the fact that Fred Durst has said that, what was it, like the Disco Elephants album? I forget what the hell they were trying to put.
Stampede of the Disco Elephant. I don't know why I know that either.
You see?
No, but I'm not proud of it.
I know, but you see? Oh. You're still thinking about it. But whatever they were trying to do with that and being signed to Cash Money Records, if you were really serious about trying to make a comeback, you would do something to bring interest back to the band, and this would be one of those interests because that album is getting to that age where I can say that, you know what? I love that album when I was a teenager, and I really want to be nostalgic about that band again. But when you try to listen to something that they just recently put out, it's absolute trash. I'm not going to pretend that Limp Bizkit's a great band by any stretch of the imagination. I'm going on record as saying that they're absolute trash right now. But if you were serious about making that comeback, and you really thought about what you were doing, that would be like the jump off point where you take that and you also take the CD, because at the time it had the Adidas shell tops on the CD top, and you put that on a vinyl. Yeah, you want that.
No, I don't.
Yeah, you do.
I have so many thoughts about this right now that I'm going to save for when we actually discuss the final top three. But
okay. But I think if you do that, that's a serious catalyst for you making that next step and saying, this is where we're going, and this is what's going to lead that charge. Lead off with the best.
I have so many thoughts about that last one, but we'll get to those thoughts in a second. All right, my three. I'm not going to say which one I want more than the other, but first one I would love to see remastered. Foo Fighters, One by One. So now, this has some amazing songs in it. All My Life, Times Like These, even like Low. Now, I actually love this album. I have a lot of personal connection to it as well, which I won't bore you all with. But the recording of this album is actually rather infamous because essentially the band had recorded a whole different album. I forget, why am I blanking on the one song that initially was on it. It's the only song that actually was recorded during this initial process that ended up making the album. But they were all just saying that, like, yeah, this album stinks. So they trashed the original recordings. And then they were pretty much on the verge of breaking up. Taylor Hawkins had an overdose, and it brought back some bad memories for Dave Grohl. And literally, Dave Grohl was becoming more interested in playing drums for Queens of the Stone Age. And literally right before they did Coachella, they were like, all right, we're just going to do one more show, then we're breaking up. But then they performed at Coachella. They realized, you know what, we're still having fun. Let's give this another shot. And then they recorded All of My Life. One by One. But if you actually listen to the production, it's still a little hampered. I think it was actually only even recorded in like 2 weeks because Grohl only did his parts in 2 weeks because he then had to go tour Queens of the Stone Age. So even though it's actually a great album, you can tell that, at least from a production standpoint, it's rushed. And given how the Foo Fighters are just so great now, and I mean, literally, Dave Grohl is, you can't not find him in a studio, whether he's recording his 23-minute instrumental song play or doing a documentary about recording studios. I would love to hear what a refreshed, open-minded, now more experienced in the studio band like Foo Fighters could do to an album like One by One. And I think there could be some cool possibilities with that.
Do you think it's a remaster or a re-record?
No, remaster.
Okay.
Because I don't think the performances are bad on that album. I just think the production, like even just the guitars, are a little bit buried. And I think the bass could be a little bit crisper in just the sound of it. So no, I would argue it's not a re-recording. It literally just go in the right studio and play around some knobs. You can make it a lot sounding of a better album.
And, you know, with just knowing what I know about the Foo Fighters now and what they've done from Wasting Light onward with Dave Grohl's own studio, at least in my opinion, a re-record of that album instead of just a remaster, I think would do amazing things for it.
I think it could, but I think a remaster could do wonders as well. And I don't think they need to re-record it.
Okay.
All right, so the second album I'd love to see remastered, Skid Row's Slave to the Grind.
Interesting.
So now, I'm not necessarily even saying that the album's that bad sounding, but I just think we're kind of going into the whole singers kind of being jerks mentality. Sebastian Bach is really annoying sometimes. And the band right now is just a shell of what it was. And I think people really forget that Skid Row was a heavy band, especially for mainstream metal. And Slave to the Grind really proves that they were awesome. Like, they were really awesome. And who knows, maybe a remastered version of it could remind people, kind of going back to what you were saying about Limp Bizkit's Significant Others. It could be a nice little reminder. It's like, oh yeah, they weren't just an annoying hair metal band.
Yeah, but that means you have to get all the parties on the same page. You've got to get the band.
We're not talking. I get that.
Could you imagine what that PR slew is going to be like?
Amazing.
To get the band back on the same page as Sebastian Bach.
It's going to be the most amazing white trash circus to watch. And we're not. We'll debate that more in a minute.
Okay.
So we'll debate that more in a minute.
You want to debate Limp Bizkit, and then okay.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm on for. So, now this one's going to start a huge debate.
All right.
And now you have to promise me, Matt, you're not going to say a word until I'm done with this.
Do you want me just to walk away, and then I'll come back at some other point in time?
Just keep your mouth shut.
Go on.
Metallica's Saint Anger.
And I'm out.
Now, by no means is this a good record. I would argue that this album has a lot of great moments that are hampered by production. Now, there was a YouTube project called Saint Anger 2015. And they didn't change a note. They didn't even add guitar solos. They literally just performed it, but with better sounding production. They got rid of the horrible trash can snare drum. And it really proves, and again, I really recommend everyone looks it up. It's hashtag Saint Anger 2015. And it just, even though like there's definitely some embarrassing moments on the album, it really proves that there's some really good moments on an otherwise flawed album.
All right.
So now we both said our piece.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to first start off by saying, going to the so now we're going to debate this.
Mm-hmm.
Regarding Limp Bizkit.
Yep.
What you just said was so beautifully said.
Aw, thank you. However, I knew there was a but in this.
There was. I'm turning my baseball cap over. It's in a serious mode right now. The truth, if you had said that about $3 bill, y'all.
Yeah.
If you had made that argument and said they should remaster that first album, I would have been like, you know what? I'm not going to fight this one. But I feel like Significant Other is the epitome of why Limp Bizkit represents everything wrong about nu metal. It's excessive. It's it's outdated to a certain degree, I would argue.
And then, you know what? You can make the same thing. You can make that argument about Queen. You can make that argument about Kiss, that it's all excess and, you know, the music was secondary to everything else. Because if you listen...
I wouldn't say that about Queen.
Kiss,
yes.
No, not... Well, Queen for excess, but Kiss for everything else.
Okay.
Absolutely,
yes.
for everything else. Because Kiss, when you think about it, going back, all of their albums in the studio are terrible. In my opinion, they're terrible. They're just so sterile. They're so very just muted. You know, if you listen to the recorded version of Rock and Roll All Night, it's the most soulless thing ever. Yeah. But then you listen to them perform that live, and everybody loves it.
Which wasn't actually performed live. But anyway.
Right. But if you listen to that type of stuff, then I would say the remaster of Limp Bizkit would be great. For, like I said, if you're serious about restarting this band and making it a thing, because for years Wes Borland was kind of on the border about, you know, being in the band, being out of the band. He was out of the band when they recorded Results May Vary. I think that was the name of the green one, whatever the hell that was. But he was not in the band at that point, and then he came back to the band, and then it's never been really anything of significance. It's like, if you really want to start and be serious about getting this thing back on track, why not lead off with what everybody loved? That's where I'm coming from.
I absolutely agree with that from a marketing standpoint. I absolutely agree. Don't even bother with a new album. Just become the nostalgia act that everyone wants to see.
Right. I
absolutely agree. I just don't necessarily... I guess in the long... What I'm trying to kind of say to, and we can come back to Limp Bizkit, is I could be open to including this in the top 3, which is something I never thought I would have said.
Okay.
So let's come back to that.
All right.
The one album on my list I'm going to fight tooth and nail for is Foo Fighters One by One.
Okay.
Just because I think... I know you were saying about, like, you know, could it be better just redone? I would argue it doesn't need to be redone. It just needs to be tinkered in the studio.
And the only reason why I'm really saying that I think it just needs to be redone, because you're saying that they go in, twist some knobs, make it better, great. But Dave Grohl with his new studio and what they did on Wasting Light, and I will go on record as saying this is by far the finest recorded album in the last like 15 to 20 years. It sounds amazing, whether it's low volume, high volume. If you listen to it at high volume, you get all of this other nuances that you don't necessarily hear if you listen to it at low volume, and it's just the way an album should be recorded, in my opinion. So
was that album done in his studio? I thought that was more...
That was the very first one.
Yeah?
That was the very first album that they did in that studio, and it was amazing.
But I would also argue that a lot of that, it wasn't just the guys being in the room recording it. A lot of it was behind the board. I mean, look at what when the Sound City documentary, how they were able to do with just that board that was in the
correct,
studio.
And that's the board that's in his studio, and
right now,
right, correct, and with all of the other equipment that goes along with it, because it's recorded on analog equipment through that specific board, which that album A was not done on, and B, I'm sure it wasn't done on all analog equipment. With the experience that the band has now, I would make the argument that if you take it into the studio and do a re-record, not just a remaster, you might get a little bit more of that magic. Plus, even if you take, you know, those songs, because they're great songs, I am not going to even knock this album in the least, because I really like this album. It's just, I think if you take that magic from the recording studio and put it to those songs, it might even become something even more special.
I still think of a remaster... So backtrack for a little bit. Could we at least agree that in regards to remastered, we'd put this in the top 3?
Yes.
Okay. So final thought on this, though, and then we'll move on to the next 2 spots. Or one, I guess.
Next one.
The next one. All right, so let's recap. Limp Bizkit's Significant Other, fine. We'll let it in. It's
win.
It's in a top 3 spot. I feel dirty saying this. Number 2, Foo Fighters One by One.
Yes.
I feel a lot cleaner saying this. So now we need one more spot.
Okay.
So that means we have Skid Row's Slave to the Grind left.
Yep.
We have Black Label Society, The Blessed Hell Ride.
Yes.
And then the album that I'm actually going to argue for. Actually, I'm sorry, 2 more spots. Korn's Follow the Leader.
2 more songs, yes.
Oh, sorry, albums.
Right, I'm following what you're putting down. So
yeah, and then Metallica Saint Anger. I want to I want to, before we toss this album aside.
Okay.
Because I can see you just like ready to jump me as I was making my argument for Metallica Saint Anger. Why should it not be in the top 3?
Because it doesn't need to be redone in a remastered type way. Once again, I'm going to argue that this is a re-record, not a remaster. The re-recording of this album, Lars made a massive mistake on snapping the snares and making it sound like a trash can.
But you can fix that in the production.
No, you can't. You can't replace that drum unless that drum is mic'd up in a specific way in which you can easily just dump that out and not have it affect anything else, and then just re-record a snare. But the snare sound is the biggest piece of the production on this thing that's plagued them for forever. And I know this. I remember this specifically. Right after that album came out, I went and saw them and Godsmack on the same tour at the Nassau Coliseum. So when they were touring Saint Anger and they played some songs from Saint Anger, guess what? He had the snare snapped on stage, and the songs actually sounded pretty good, because I believe they did Frantic, and I think they did Saint Anger. Mm-hmm. And they actually sounded pretty good.
I'm actually surprised they played that many songs off Saint Anger.
Well, they did, because it was for the tour, and I'm sure that they were obliged to do it.
Yeah, that's fair.
So,
because I just know that even like during that tour, like everyone was a little surprised at like the lack of songs that they played from Saint Anger. It's like almost as if they like listened to the fans.
Right. Well, they should have, because I don't know why. I know where the band was, and I remember watching the Some Kind of Monster documentary on the band, and yeah, they weren't in the greatest of places. They were replacing a bass player, so on and so forth. But to get fans to be on your side and to rally around you, especially in times of need, I want to say, for a band, because they were really in a time of need at that point, that they needed something. Rob, I think, was the catalyst to bring them back. And
that was before he even, like, they recorded that album even before he got into the picture,
right,
too.
But I think that what they needed to do was they needed to get that bass player to get them back on track, because they were just, like, no pun intended, one of the songs, Frantic. They were frantically trying to do something different. We're trying to still be relevant. We're still trying to be this, that, and the other thing. Well, instead of going back to what made you popular, you thought that the greatest thing in the world was to unsnap your snares and sound like you're recording this thing in a goddamn garage. I don't think that was good for anybody. Mm-hmm. And now looking back on that, X number of years later, I think they might agree. And even after, when they were on tour, they might have agreed, you know what? Maybe we shouldn't have made it sound like, we had one microphone in a garage and some trash cans and such. Maybe with a band with as much money, and I believe they were giving Rob Trujillo a $1 million signing bonus to be the bass player. Mm-hmm. I think with a band with that much money, you can afford some drums and guitars and microphones, and, you can afford these things. Why make it sound so cheap?
Yeah.
So I argue for the re-record of that whole thing.
I will bow down to that argument, and I mean, I maybe I also have more of a personal connection to that album, just because I realized from Saint Anger that, or just watching Some Kind of Monster documentary, that they needed to make that album, and even that kind of sounding album, because I mean, it wasn't just simply them losing a bassist. They were almost going to break up. Like, James wasn't sure if he wanted to be in a band anymore.
Oh, absolutely.
But I would also agree that, like, you know what? You need to do more than just remaster. Because, so, I believe it was in 2007 or 8 when they performed at the British School Benefit Show. Like, it was an acoustic set. And they actually did an acoustic version of All Within My Hands. That was also kind of restructuring it. So they added they slowed it down. They made it almost very much like just like Fade to Black kind of style. And they added a guitar solo. And it's one of those, when you listen to it, you can just picture it as if they had added electric guitar into the chorus. It would have been the most epic Metallica ballad. And so I would argue that maybe if they just need to kind of like going back to what I was saying, good song ideas, some strong moments, They just needed to reconstructure it a little bit.
And I honestly think that the band realizes that there might be some good parts, because that's what Metallica named their foundation now. They're going when
All
they're
of
going
my hands.
Yeah. So
It's a great. It's also that's also I was going to say one of the really big standout songs on that album. But anyway, so I think we agree. Saint Anger, goodbye. Not on this list anymore. So that leaves
Right.
us with, Black Label Societies, The Blessed Hell Ride, Korn's Follow the Leader, and
Slave to the
Grind by Skid Row.
okay.
I'm going to argue that because I let you have one new metal album on this
Okay.
list, that we should push aside Korn's Follow the Leader.
Okay. So I think for Korn, I think the main reason why I had this on here was just going back over the album when I was trying to find stuff for this. I found that I still love this album, and it's hard for me to get into newer Korn just because they're kind of all over the place. They're not staying in one place for too long. Korn 3 was a train wreck. I hated that thing.
There's no point in even bringing that up. That album.
But yeah, that album was complete trash. And then the Path of Totality, that's just why? I understand that you're trying to do something different and maybe reignite that new metal in a totally new school way, and that just didn't do it for me.
I would actually argue that particular album was the most refreshing Korn album during that time in a long time, which is not saying much, but there was actually some moments on that album like, oh, this is actually not bad.
Right.
But it's not anything like their heyday.
Right,
course.
exactly. And I think that, once again, if you are serious about trying to get people back on board, like especially for the casual Korn listener like me, I would say I'm casual Korn all the way. Like when they have something that comes out, oh, okay, let me take a quick listen. Okay, it's nothing great. Move on. I'm not digging into the album. I'm not trying to find, meanings to songs and listen to like the snare production or anything like that. So just definitely more of a casual Korn listener. But if you want the old school Korn fans to come back, once again, you do that and you reignite the flame with something that was the best of your older catalog.
I'm going to make an argument, though, that Korn fans never really left. It's not the same.
That's the hardcore.
But I would like Limp Bizkit fans. Yeah, they've kind of left. They're in the hiding. Korn are actually pretty popular again. Like the last album, Serenity. Why am I blanking on the name of it?
Serenity of Suffering.
Yes, the Serenity of Suffering. I actually thought it was a pretty good album. They're actually, when they're doing co-handling tours of amphitheaters, they're actually selling pretty well. I don't necessarily think they need to reignite a fire underneath fans. Whereas I would agree that Limp Bizkit, they need to do more than just play a show. Korn, okay, we're just going to play this album in its entirety at a show, and that's going to bring the fans out.
Right, and that's what they're doing to Follow the Leader, aren't they?
Kind of. They're not playing it in its entirety, because there's some songs even they realize it's like, yeah, we should just keep this one buried.
Okay.
But so I would almost argue that they don't need to remaster that album to reignite the fans. I just am inclined to still. I'm not convinced about that album.
Okay, we can take that off the table.
Maybe we can return to it. Although, so it sounds like you're not convinced about Slave to the Grind. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Once again, I think that in order for that type of remaster to happen, you need to get the band and you need to get Sebastian Bach on the same page and say, look, we want to remaster this thing. We want to put this out again. And you guys have a chance to make some money off of this. But I think that both of them, both the band and Sebastian Bach, both have their heads so far up their butts that, the band wants to continue to do their thing and feel like that they're still relevant when they're really not. They're another nostalgia act. Sebastian Bach, great vocalist, has not done anything. His solo records, even with Axl Rose in the time that Guns N' Roses was still doing the Chinese democracy thing, showing up on his album and helping him sing a couple of songs, even that couldn't ignite a spark underneath anything Sebastian Bach is doing. So it's like everybody who's an 80s rocker wants that band together again, but it's never going to happen. So to me, what would be the point of doing that?
So two things to that. First, Sebastian Bach has actually said in interviews that he would actually love to hear that album remastered. But
Right.
it's the other the band members who don't want it to happen.
Right, but
so
then
I get that.
But you can also make the argument that they don't want to get back together, or Sebastian Bach does want to get back together, but the band is never going to do that.
But then, so the second point is, let's just take off the table whether it's even possible or not. Because we don't necessarily, I mean, for this list, it doesn't necessarily be like, oh, what's the most likely to happen?
Okay.
Because, I mean, I get it, like, how it could benefit a band, and that's why bands remaster albums is to benefit off of it. I mean, look at Guns N' Roses. This is making fans, for the time being, ignore if a new album's coming out or not. Or maybe, honestly, you can make the argument that a remastered Appetite for Destruction is better than a new album from of actual songs from Guns N' Roses. But so let's take aside whether it's actually possible or not. Okay. If you had an opportunity to listen to like, let's say, somehow it happened, they remastered the album and it's coming out. If you had a chance to listen to a remastered version of Slave to the Grind by Skid Row, would you want to actually hear it? Would you actually pay for it?
I'm not the biggest Skid Row fan. I think I would give it the once over just to listen to the differences between the original and the remaster, because that's essentially what Appetite for Destruction's remaster did for me. It's like, okay, let's listen to the remaster because I want to see what's different. And there are some vast differences. Whether or not that makes it better or worse, that's, to each their own.
And I would argue that, like, that's my thinking behind, like, if you were to ask me the same question about Black Label Society's The Blessed Hell Ride, that's the same kind of answer I would have. Because I like Black Label Society. I honestly haven't really cared about a new Black Label Society album in God knows how long, as much as I like Zakk Wylde. And it's funny that you mentioned 1919 before we even you gave your explanation about The Blessed Hell Ride, because if you had said that your pick was that album instead of Blessed Hell Ride, I probably would have been more interested, because that's the album that got me into the band.
Okay.
Even before I really listened to what Zakk Wylde did with Ozzy, even. Like, I was a fan of Ozzy Osbourne, but of course it was mostly of Randy Rhoads stuff.
Right.
So from a nostalgia standpoint, I feel like I'd be more inclined to give 1919 a listen. Whereas The Blessed Hell Ride, there's some good songs in it, but I don't really go back and listen to it, to be honest.
And, I feel like the more that we talk about the Blessed Hell Ride, that it has its moments where it's good and where, it's kind of just, Zakk writing songs that are, just to fill an album. I can see that. What Skid Row did in the 80s, I feel like was something, I guess I would say kind of special.
Oh, yeah.
So
absolutely.
If we were to say to take Black Label off of this list, I could agree to take Black Label off the list.
Okay.
And make Slave to the Grind the last entry here.
That just made me excited. Now, well, I guess I'm glad that you recognize, because I really do feel like people forget how special Skid Row was at its peak. And because if you listen to this self-titled album of Skid Row versus Slave to the Grind, they could have easily just made the Skid Row self-titled album Part 2 and done even more ballads on that album. But instead, they did Monkey Business, which is a groovy, heavy song. Slave to the Grind, which is pretty much just borderline like thrash with more pop elements, of course, to it, but like, it's a heavy album, and it reached #1, which is pretty. I mean, I think that shows you the sign of the times at the time, that when metal really was big. But I would argue that Skid Row was able to make way for a band like Pantera to come out with Cowboys from Hell and actually be successful, and not just fan favorites. And I feel like even if the remaster comes out and it really doesn't sound much different, because, yeah, we're never going to have the original Skid Row back together, nor do we really need them to come back together, let's be frank. But at the very least, just having that remastered album could maybe remind some people, hey, Skid Row was actually a good band at one point. So I would, if you're down for it, I'd like to make Skid Row in the final 3.
That's fine.
So then let's recap. We've come to agreement after what feels like hours and hours and hours of debates. So the top 3 in no particular order, because that's just gonna because we're gonna be fighting that for another 3 hours too.
Yeah.
Foo Fighters, One by One, followed by Limp Bizkit's The Significant Other. I can't believe I just said that. And then finally, rounding out the top 3, Skid Row's Slave to the Grind.
I'm just happy that I was able to get you to agree to Limp Bizkit.
It's funny because it's not like I could really argue a lot against your points. But if you disagree, those who are listening to us, let us know on our social media channels on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and tell us which albums you think should be remastered. So with that said, I'm Zach Shaw.
I'm Matt Gamba.
And thanks for listening to If You Had to Pick 3.